Welcome back, everyone. So welcome back to the class 3. So today we are going to review the global case study and also examine the real-world application on the regenerative design across different regions. So from the architectural innovation and community-led project, and also I hope that like through this you can also find out some inspirational like project and also review their impact to different community. It's very interesting like for recording of this class because today I'm actually in Bali, and some of the project that will be mentioned is also in Bali as well, just like last time round. I also hope you took the chance to check out like what I requested you guys to do, which is reviewing Julia Watson like in the low tech previously when we were talking about the ancestral wisdom, how it's being incorporated in the project. In fact, for the past few days, I've also been like looking around the regenerative project in Bali. So next in the next class, I'm also going to show you like what are the how are these projects impacted their community, and also what are the social innovation that has been like carried out in this region as well. So yeah, so today is going to be the structure is going to be simpler because it's like we are going to go through some of the project we did previously, and also the evolution of regenerative practice. I also find that it's important for you to understand like how this history of regenerative practice like play a role in shaping out the different direction of regenerative practice. And also we are going to go through the case study and then a time to review. Okay, without further ado, perhaps we can start. So in fact, a few years ago, we set out an alliance like together with 9 different consortium around the world. So there are Burkina Faso, Mexico, Canada, Sweden, Cyprus, France, and Denmark and Malaysia as well. Like so how we were doing it is like how like it's important for like when we're talking about the climatic challenges, we're not simply viewing it from the global north point of view, because a lot of times it's like similar to the like a lot of like like so there's a lot of situation that like since the post-colonial like context, we've been seeing a lot of like global issue only center um, in the despite the like a lot of disaster happen in the global south, but then the conversation center in the global north. So how do we meaningfully comes together and looking at the like driving a productive like relationship between the global north and the global south, and conversation as well. um so this is what we have been looking at. And also rather than making the conversation very singular by dictating like, oh, when we talk about sustainability, it seems to be like only certain issue, but in fact like different region is dealing with different climatic challenges. So like for example in oops. I realize I can't play back. But for example, in Mexico, for the like the kind of issue that they've been dealing with is actually the river, on the river Xochimilco River. And then the one in Burkina Faso, it has to do with like the political climate. It's like it's quite complex there because there's also a civil war. And for Cyprus, also equally like political, because it's like is the hub that we are working with is actually centered in Nicosia, which is also a divided city between the Greece side and the Turkish side. So for the Malaysian side, it has to do with like because we happen to be in the emerging market in an emerging nation. So there's a lot of like rapid development causing material, like different type of material, like being used previously, like in the developed nation, like being imported to the developed in the region. So there's a lot of conversation on like where are we keep using certain material, like for example the concrete and and the steel and the glass. So in fact, like as we mentioned in the previous chapter, that most of the building doesn't really last long, especially the one that like building for the commercial purpose and perhaps the residential purpose as well. Like if they don't last long, and the way we build, it seems to be like only allowing them to have a very their lifespan um basically shortened because of like certain policy changes or the zoning changes. And then so how could we looking at like a more sustainable solution, like by looking at like pairing with our observation or conversation on like how do we looking at like the in the ecosystem, what are the available material that we can replace those material. Because if you speak about like all these modern like building built for the modernism, like concrete or steel, they are also highly political in a way that like only certain company or certain like for example in certain country, most of the country, like concrete is actually owned by certain like only a few company, similar to Malaysia as well. So for the material transformation, which is like the test bed in Malaysia, we were looking at like how do we meaningfully transform material into usable material for the construction. So earlier I spoke about like this consortium. We were looking at like for example the green enough transformation, because in a way when we speak about the global challenges, it cannot be singular. It cannot be like only speaking about like certain like view from certain country or certain region. So what we found out is we will, if we want to work meaningfully together, we also will need to like showcase the differences, like in different contexts. So in like for example Burkina Faso, like as I mentioned, how do they looking at the sustainable construction and self-sustaining community in that region? Because they experience civil war, they also experience very complicated like political climate. So a lot of time, like they ended up to having to build that like resilience to build that building, to build the cities. So in the process, they also ended up like to develop their very region specific like technique to build things together. And for the test bed two in Cyprus, they were looking at the water scarcity, because it itself is also a garden. So they actually initially they have a very ambitious master plan to develop like 100 garden across the country. And for the test bed three, Mexico, um, Mexico is also similar to some other city like Jakarta or big city in Southeast Asia because of the rapid development. The most part of the country is actually sinking. So when I was in Mexico, I also realized that none of the building in the city center, including the heritage one, none of the building is straightly erected. It was somehow like tilted because of the sinkage. So it has to do with like over the development, like there's a lot of people drawing or the system drawing the underground water, causing the imbalance in within the plates. So so Mexico City, because of the water gap, um, this time round, actually, we're more focusing on the Xochimilco River, which is the river provided, like I think I mentioned in the previous chapter as well, is provided like top top 0.6% of the biodiversity of Mexico. And when it comes to, according to the what the local people told me, and also the farmer, the scientists in the region said, it's like 2%, and it is also the 2% representing 2% of the biodiversity of the world. So it was a very interesting context to look into, but at the same time, it's like because it's positioned it's being positioned as a food basket of the country, so it's ended out a lot of time being exploited, despite it's being established by UNESCO as a preserved like area, but you can still see a lot of gorilla like settlements and the houses and by the farmers of the region. They still want to live in the river, and at the same time like cultivating different parts of the shore bank to be their farming ground. So in Malaysia, as I mentioned, like because of the rapid industrialization, so there's also a lot of significant impact toward the landscape, towards the industry. So with Borneo Lab, we are also looking at like how could we catalyze systemic changes, and also how do we like re-looking into the material possibilities. So there's a lot of experimentation on the material side. Yeah. So this is also apart from like looking at that, we also involve like students from Fengshan University since like 2022 to look into like different resolution on like how could we build in a more collapsible way? How could we use alternative material for the process? How could we like in the process, like perhaps there are also wet process and the hybrid processes. So some of the names perhaps you remember, like it's also one of your senior. Um, so in Betterment Lab, like 2022, so we already have this pavilion in the rooftop, but like for the material at the bottom, we were using like the timber tasks we collected like from the around the city, which like from what we know from the carpenter, they normally can create like 1 ton like along a month. So normally they just discarded it, but then like in this process, how could we show a process that like can enable like this tile can be made. So the other one is like, like there's also a lot of like structure like needed perhaps in different festival, in different situation. So we were looking at like how could we build in a way that like is lightweighted, but at the same time is define the space. So this define the 2023 the the cloud project. So there was also a lot of like workshop being conducted on site as well. And then we were looking at like different recipe to enable like the process to be documented, to be properly like tested as well in terms of the loading, in terms of like its capacity, indoor and outdoor. So like what we did is like along that 3 years, like whatever review, we put it outdoor like for a while, and also witnesses like observing like its changes. So whether it is valid as the building material. So I would say a lot of these tests is quite empirical. But at the same time, because it's being displayed in the exhibition, it's also help the other like third party people, like for example the scientists, and recently there were also like the environmentalist lawyer came and see the work, and then being quite impressed and excited about its potential and how could we use this project to enable policy changes. So this is like how we build the mold and then putting the tiles together. Yeah. So this is like the outcome of that project. Yeah, so in 2024, we were also looking at like similarly to a previous year, how could the material be used for alternative material can be used for brick, can be used for tile. So by the end of it, it's also ended with like a propagation and also the processes like how we demonstrated like the potential from different material. Yeah, so these are actually the material tested by one of the student, and seeing its progress. So the tile will also being used as like the panel for this structure. So then it shows its when it comes to the yeah, these are the basically like what you saw earlier is the project of like the good enough transformation, and in fact the conversation is still going on. And I also just came back from Cyprus, like so to look into like what Nicosia, like the partner in Nicosia, what they um have been progressing. So we are looking at like the next step, like how could the consortium form a much stronger like consortium by perhaps like extending like to a wider network, or looking at the project more in depth in different region. So I think it's exciting because like previously when you look at the regenerative practice, a lot of time is tend to be focused on like certain region, but because of like there's a need, there's an urgency, and I think there's a lot of global aspiration as well to connect on this conversation. So project like or the kind of consortium you see like the good enough transformation is bound to happen. Just like the movement of like some of its predecessor like modernism, like there will be a lot of like it was a lot of global conversation. So I think there will be like more global conversation like this happen soon. But before we move too far, I think that it's good to go through the history, the evolution of regenerative practice. So yeah, so previously I think we mentioned about like the wisdom, the ancestral wisdom, how is show its relevancy in the movement of regenerative practice, and I think like over here, what you're seeing is actually like one of my favorite place in Bali. So it's called Tanah Lot. Tanah Lot is a temple. So in Bali Island is very interesting because Bali Island, it has different temple, define different uh like side, or the or the facing of like I think it's orientated like apart from the mountain and the sea, it's also orientated like in a way that it can protect the island. So one of its southern part is actually Tanah Lot. So Tanah Lot is very interesting because it is seasonal. Like in terms of like how you can access the island and the temple is decided by the rhythm of the tide. So if the tide is like the water tide is too high, you wouldn't be able to access it. And and in the indigenous and ancestral knowledge like with system, basically like as we can see the built environment over the like for the buildings or for the structure, like in the pre-industrial wisdom time, it was like it tend to be an expression of like its cosmology, its ecology and collective identity. Like for this one is actually representing the Balinese identity. um so like I think it's not hard for all of us to realize what impacted like the built environment the most is actually Industrial Revolution in 1800 until early 1900. So it was like in 1835 we actually witnesses the emergence of machine, but also because of that, like there's still a lot of like labor need to be used to fine tune the machine, or to work together with the machine, or to like repair the machine. So it's ended out like there's a lot of child labor being used because of there's a demand of the cheap labor, and also like the size of the kids is more relevant to perhaps like work together with the machine. And because of that, there's is drove the emergence of town and city. Like for example, Winchester in the 1853 was one of the example like of how the machine and how the Industrial Revolution actually drove the appearance and also the city. And in 1852, Cottonpolis, so it's like I think as the name of the town, Cottonpolis, you can see like is linked to the metropolitan polis is like the place. So it's a cotton place. There's also a lot of emergence of the factory to use for like different material like production. So but then, because of all this like development, a rapid development of like and emergence of the factory, emergence of the city, like there were a lot of people started to aware craft is disappearing. So then we witnesses like the first resistance like movement in the West was actually all what we mentioned earlier, like for those movement, it has yet to sink to the east. This mostly happened in Europe, or more specifically UK. Like so there was also a resistant movement because people realized the disappearance of the art and craft. If you moving all the people like most of the people like the productive like generation to the city, imagine what will happen to the town, what will happen to the village. So perhaps like most of them were like they used to hold certain wisdom or certain knowledge of like how to work on the certain art or craft. They disappeared. They went to the city and turned themselves into labor. And imagine what will happen for the country or for the nation, for the regional identity by large. So William Morris, like which was one of the pioneers of this art and craft movement, without dignifying creative human occupation, people become disconnected from life. I think there was also a realization of like how art and craft was linked to the nature, because it's like for example certain color you need to get it from the plants or from the nature. So you also need to get hold of like certain knowledge to how that process can happen. So there was an anxiety of like working with the machine, and people becoming like a machine, and people also not being able to reconnect like with the nature. So that anxiety triggered this resistant movement. And so during that time, Morris and his follower also believed the division of labor, which is like the so if you look into like the foundation of like this is foundation of like capitalism, which the modern industry dependence was undesirable, but that extent to which every design should be carried out by the designer was a matter for debate and disagreement. So what he was saying is a lot of time when there is a division of the labor like towards a design. In the past it was craftsmen did everything. They did everything from design to refinement, to the making, and then to debugging, and then come back to like looking at. So the entire process, as you can see, is very holistic. But all of a sudden, like because of the industrial revolution, industrial movement, so it's ended out to be like, there was a lot of division in the process. So yeah, and the other resistant movement was garden city movement. So how city became factory, like as you can see earlier, like during the industrialized revolution, or during the industrialized like movement. So a lot of city actually experienced like um pollution, like for example England during that time, the London during that time also experienced a lot of like pollution, air pollution, and water pollution as well. So there was a discussion of like how to bring back garden into the city. So that also triggered garden city movement, which was also a very important movement. So the proposal is like, rather than like having the church at the center, like how could we place the garden in the center, and then like we divided like the city by in a radial way. So in a way, like most of the housing happened over here, if you can see my mouse cursor, and then the factory is actually on the outer layer of the city. Yeah, so the post-war modernism is like 1940 to 1960, which is also like with one of the project I introduced like earlier. So there was a lot of ecological and social disaster increase, like for example this pre-eco like housing, um and then in 1961, I hope you all like know Jan Jacob. So Jan Jacob is actually a very important and famous like critique in terms of the urban not simply the urbanism, but also the architecture as well. So she has written The Death and Life of the Great American Cities. So she's actually a critique of like a rationalist like planners. Like for example, previously I also brought in like the work from Le Corbusier, and then she actually argued that like there's a need to look into the experience of the residents, and a lot of time like the modernist urban planning, they overlook and oversimplify the complexity of human life in the diverse community. Like a lot of time, like if you look at like the city which we mentioned and also proposed by Le Corbusier, is very divisive in terms of like, okay, where the like how the car go, and also how the pedestrian go, but then there's no elements that will enable people to stop in the city center, or in the or meet each other, or to becoming spaces like the third spaces, which is like will enable people to gather. So it's all built for the functionality of driving the industrial revolution on how the city can be built into something very efficient, rather than looking at city as a place to grow different relationship. So she actually opposed like a lot of large scale urban renewal program, because she thought that it will affect like the entire neighborhood, and building all the freeway, which is like the highway, as you can see from Le Corbusier like proposal. So she instead like advocate for dense mixed use development. So the mixed use development, I think the typical one, you can see it from like in Paris, like there's a lot of mixed use spaces, which was proposed um, during the Napoleon times, and also the walkable street with the eye on the street of the passerby, helping to maintain the public order. Yeah, so she also suggested to preserving the existing city fabric, because like for example, otherwise like what you saw in the utopia, like urban planning, a lot of time like most of these like heritage building was being considered as useless, or being considered as like uh can be discarded. So over here we are speaking about like the old building and also the established community, because the community was already there before the architect stepped in. So how could we respect the fabric of the existing fabric of the city was one of the key priority according to what she said. And then another important classic, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, also happened during the same time. So during this time, there was a lot of environmental issue, which trigger like the research of this book. So the research of this book actually focus a lot on like the environmental impact of like the policy. So so can you imagine like in 1960, before 1962, because before this book, like environmental crisis wasn't being seen as the main subject of the public space. So this book was important because it's also trigger like a lot of like attention to look into the environmental issue, like the pollution, the chemical pollution, and the air pollution. So which also further changed the Western world as well. And I also want to bring attention to, I know, like, you know, the appearance of like biodynamic agriculture actually happened earlier, 1920, 24. But this is also important because it's like I think for a long time it's being seen as like, you know, something like what Rudolf Steiner has proposed was being seen as something a bit like spiritual, or perhaps like, you know, like other than what the mainstream architecture like is doing. So but if you look at like the organic farming movement, the first form of organic farming movement actually happened here, happened because of Rudolf Steiner. And what is biodynamic agriculture? It's actually over here is like it's used the management practice that are intended to restore, maintain and enhance the ecological harmony. And central feature include crops diversification and avoidance of chemical soil treatment and off-farm input generally. Decentralized production and distribution, and the consideration of celestial and terrestrial view on the biological organism. So this is what like capture in the organic agriculture. And during his time and during the discussion of biodynamic like agriculture, it's very interesting. They speak about compost. Like compost, like I think during pandemic, perhaps some of you also like were looking at compost or growing things. So compost, like how do you make compost? It was already mentioned in 2020. How could we have the seed sovereignty? So what does that means is like how could you not simply getting the seed from the government, because a lot of time like it has been controlled by certain company, seed company. So then they can dictate like what kind of pesticide, what kind of fertilizer you use. So how do you keep your own seed sovereignty? And then how could we bring back the planting calendar? So if you look at this, like as earlier chapter, we speak about like how agriculture actually has a strong impact towards the land, how we drive the land, how we develop the land. These actually bring back a lot of like ancestral wisdom in the process. So it's also further trigger organic farming. And Rudolf Steiner was also known to establish another system, Waldorf education system, which is I think there's also quite a few in Taiwan as well. And his artwork also later inspired Joseph Beuys. So if you happen to know Joseph Beuys or happen to attended like one of my class like previously in the design studio, I mentioned Joseph Boy as like, you know, so in his work in Documenta in Castle, he erected like more than thousands of oak tree, 7,000 of oak tree along the city. So it was a very inspirational and also very important uh artist in the Fluxus movement. So if you wish to know more about him, I will urge you to check out, like, because it's quite important how his work also later inspire Green Party as well, which he also had a hand in establishing. So he's not simply an artist; he is also at the same time a politician, and like you can also from his work you can see a lot of urbanist touch as well. And Rudolf Steiner is also a social reformist. So he is actually a man with many hats. Like he wasn't simply looking at, like, a singular uh uh discipline of work. And the other things that like he was doing is like he built quite a number of building like while establishing his field of study. Okay, and in 70s, I think like it seems to be quite organic that like we come to here. There is also an emergence of like permaculture. So you also heard about a lot of movement in of permaculture in Taiwan or in Asia, but it's actually started in 1970. Bill Mollison and David Mogren. So in Australia. So what this means is actually like it's a it's a relationship, the principle of the relationship of like how people build. So it's a center like by the people, and so then it has the zone zero, like the house or settlement, and then zone one is actually like where you place your kitchen, your garden, and also the microclimate. And then the zone two is the semi-intensive like cultivation, so where you make your food production, where the market crop happen. And then zone three is actually like, okay, the larger fruit and the trees and the pasture and the cash crop. Zone four is actually like you should like it should be the place like with minimal care, like so basically the wild food like gathering and also the wood cutting for perhaps like the heat and the or the fuel. And then zone five is like, oh, you don't need to manage that part, like wilderness zone, foraging, inspiration, and meditation. So what this reminding you of? Because I think in the earlier chapter we mentioned about um, the like how the Mayan forests were being like cultivated. You see, like there were four different transition, and as you can see over here, perhaps it's like there is apart from the kitchen and then the zone zero. Don't you think like from zone two to zone five is very similar of the Mayan like forest? So these are actually, as you can see, there is also it seems to be also borrowing a lot of inspiration from different uh, culture and also the past ancestral wisdom. Okay, that's the introduction.
I'm David Holmgren, and I'm best known as the co-originator of the permaculture concept in the 1970s with Bill Mollison. Sometimes there's two stories that are told about how the idea of permaculture really came about. One story is that Mollison was my supervising academic, and I was just some technical assistant who worked with him. And then there's the opposite of that, which is I was the brilliant student and he was the academic who stole my work, which neither of those are true. I mean, for a start, he was my mentor while I was working on that permaculture manuscript. But if it had been left to me, the permaculture manuscript would have just mouldered away in a drawer. It was Bill who was like, no, we're going to take this to the world. The core of the idea of permaculture really came about when I was coming towards the end of my first year in environmental design. And my interests were gravitating around ecology, agriculture, and landscape design. And I could see how two of these connected, but I couldn't see anywhere where the three crossed over and intersected. So I wanted to look at that. At a seminar about how land is owned and controlled, there was a bloke there who said some really interesting things. He pointed out that the rabbit problem in Australia could have been solved by rabbit trappers, but they had no incentive to do so because they didn't benefit from the land being in better condition from there being less rabbits. So what did they do? They farmed the rabbits on the farmer's land. So he was pointing out that the ownership of the land had this really adverse effect on the sustainability of the land. I thought, God, this guy thinks just completely different to the academic ecologists I'd met. And that was Bill Mollison. I got chatting with him afterwards and I said, well, I'm interested in this intersection between ecology, agriculture, and landscape design, and how natural systems could influence that. And he said, oh, how about this for an idea then? If most places on the planet, nature creates a forest, why doesn't our agriculture, if not look like a forest, function something like a forest? Why is our agriculture all composed of only annual plants that grow and die in 1 year? Whereas in nature, there's a diversity. And that's exactly in that intersection. By understanding how nature designs things, we can create permanent agriculture and permanent culture in everything we do. And that became permaculture.
It comes from two Latin roots, permanens, to persist through time, and culture, an activity that supports human existence. So put those together, it's a persistent system that supports human existence.
So Bill was my mentor. We were developing the first permaculture garden on the fringes of Hobart and persuaded me that we should publish it. But I didn't have a lot of the experience in all the different fields that underpin permaculture. And so my passion was about doing those things and building Meliodora here. Whereas Bill was ready for a larger stage and taking permaculture to the world was his next agenda, and developed the beginning of the permaculture design course. And that mechanism was really how permaculture spread, not just in Australia, but around the world.
So yeah, but at the same time, like, despite the establishments of like the permaculture, like it wasn't really established like fully, but it was there was an emergence, and I think it's also triggered by like a lot of situation happens on 1970s. There's a oil shock incidents that happened in 1970s. And if you look at this New York skyline, the Manhattan skyline, was basically covered in a heavy smoke during the 1973. So so there was a lot of realization during that time, like how pollution can impact the environment, and also how much of the reliance, like single reliance on the oil, will also cause like a lot of big impact like towards the economy as well. So in 1972, if you look at this book, I actually would encourage you guys to have a read on this book, The Limit to Grow. There was an attempt to, I think this is a very interesting project that like how it was attempt to model human development like across 2 century, 200 years. So using a computer model called War Tree. So it was a multinational team working out of the MIT and run the projection for population, for industrialization, for the food availability, for the resource depletion and pollution. So suddenly it was triggered by like whatever they saw in the 1970s, and what they found that like whatever you do with the input data, no matter how generous you are with the resource stock and the technological improvement, there's only one outcome. The industrialization can only go so far. Sooner or later, it will overshoot the Earth capacity. So all of a sudden there's a understanding of like the concept of earth capacity. So our earth actually has a limit. It wouldn't like forever generously like give us all the resources that like uh we it has. So, and I think in this book it's also mentioned that if the present growth trend in the world population, industrialization, population, pollution, food production, and resources depletion continue unchanged from that time onward, the limit to grow will reach sometimes within the next 100 years. So these most probably result will be rather sudden or uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity. So what is meant is actually like 2070, 72. So can you imagine like we are actually like less than 50 years around that time. And it is possible to alter this growth trend and to establish a condition of ecological and economic stability that is sustainable far into the future. So it wasn't like fully pessimistic. It was also proposing that we have to do things differently. And if the world people decide to strive for the next outcome rather than the first, the sooner they begin working to attain it, the greater will be their chance of success. So if we act like soon during that time, we will be able to attain like a more possible way for human continue to grow and thrive. Like yeah, so in 1972, another important incident also happened. So it was regarded like the global policy towards how we look into pollution, how we look into like, because we realize pollution is actually not simply a problem of a nation. Pollution, like we share the air, we share the water, we share resources, we share everything. So UN Stockholm United Nations Stockholm Conference in 1972 established that. So there's a mention of like, for example, like the first 14 natural resources must be safeguarded. Yeah. So basically natural resources like oil, gas, and also there was a mention of earth capacity in the previous book I mentioned. The earth capacity to produce renewable resources must be maintained. Yeah. And non-renewable resources must be shared, but not exhausted. You cannot just take like as you wish. Pollution must not exceed the environmental capacity to clean itself. So there was already an understanding of like we cannot like just keep producing pollution towards the environment. But at the same time, it's almost like impossible to not having some, like if the development is undergoing the process like during that time, and then the integrated development planning is needed. So this is where like it started to um to define, like redefine, trying to redefine the central priority of the urban planning or the architectural planning. Rational planning should resolve conflict between environment and development. So you see another parts that like mentioned, like trying to redefine like urbanism. Human settlement must be planned to eliminate environmental problems. So what is meant is actually more towards the regenerative approach rather than conventional approach. Human settlement must be planned to eliminate environmental problems. So if you think about like this, it's like, what does it mean? It's like, how could like the way we design the human settlement can help to improve the environment rather than deplete it. So regenerative design for the sustainable development also, this book also happened in 1994. So it seems to comes out organically. It's about design the system and solution that work with and mimic the way that natural system return the energy from less usable form to more usable form. And regenerative design also use system thinking and other approaches to create resilient and equitable system that integrate the needs of society and well-being of nature. So there was a seven principle of regenerative design: wholeness, whole system thinking, and developmental approach, essence, potential, reciprocal, nodal, and nestedness. So it was also Bill Reitz and Ben Hargett since 2000 also introduced the emergence of regenerative development and design movement. Yeah. So when we think about like in UN the policy, like in 1972, so in the point 14, it's like how could the human settlement eliminate the environmental problem and they enable our space to be better, enable our environment to be better. So when we speak about like the conventional approach, it's like it's tend to be degenerating the system, the earth capacity. But when it comes to the like if we willing to look into like regenerative movement, then the living system and like with the pattern thinking, with the qualitative like thinking, with the living and whole system thinking, and doing the right thing, like less energy required, and it's also regenerating life and system back into the space. So it was looking at like the whole living system as its fundamental driving forces, habitat, people, building, and infrastructure. So it's an wholesome like ecology. Yeah. So to conclude, like what we went through in terms of the timeline, as you can see, the emergence of regenerative design in relation to the crisis and the awareness happened during that time. Uh, happened during that time. So basically, it is a response. Like unfortunately, like a lot of time, human tend to be a bit short-term thinking, short-term minded thinking, and a lot of time, like when you look at even it seems organic, but it was a response to crisis. It was responding to disconnection and system failure across different historical movement moment. So during the pre-industrial wisdom, the built environment was still an expression of cosmology, ecology, and collective identity, which you can see in a lot of like different houses or like long houses in the past, and also the villages or the yurt or the temple. But during that time, we don't talk about regenerative design. It was just purely like practice was already embodied and communal. And then during the Industrial Revolution and urbanization in the 1800s and until like early 1900, rapid mechanization, urban slum, pollution, resource extraction. So there was a separation from the land and cycle began. But then the reaction is like the art and craft movement. There was a resistant forces, as mentioned, like trying to bring focus back to the craft, trying to bring focus back to human scale design, and also the garden city attempt to integrate the nature and the city as well. But if you look at this, is the key awareness of this is because of the loss of craft. And also people were anxious about that alienation from the nature. And then the post-war modernism in 1940 to 1960, city rebuilt for speed and efficiency, modernist ideology dominate. And mass housing, highways, zoning, like as we mentioned about the utopia thinking, utopia city thinking by Le Corbusier. Actually, it wasn't just him; it was actually a shared ideology by a lot of architects during that time. So it's causing a lot of destruction and of the cultural cohesion, just like what Jane Jacob mentioned, and also the land rhythm as well. And the ecological and social disaster increase because we tend to be just housing to fix the housing rather than like really looking at it holistically, what living means. Yeah, so as you can see, Silent Spring, how the emergence of Silent Spring actually carry a lot of weight to this development. And Jane Jacob like writing on the death and life of the great American city as well. But then these also bring during this time also brought in a lot of like regenerative thought. Rudolf Steiner, biodynamic agriculture. You can see this happen not simply in in where Rudolf Steiner established his practice, but also starting to spread to the rest of the world, and also the early permaculture in Australia as well. And in 70s and 80s was interesting because environmental crisis becoming so vivid to the point that oil shock happened in 70s happened, pollution happened, climate evidence also being gathered as well. So then like you started to see like a lot of propagation, like limit to grow, speak about like, yeah, we only have 100 years to go. UN Stockholm conference also started to look into the policy making to enable country to work together. Regenerative design also being coined. How could we move beyond minimizing harm? Rather than just minimizing harm, how could we regenerate like the city, the human settlement to enable betterment to be created to the city, to human settlement or to the entire environment. So the new vision is not just sustaining a damaged system, but to participate in the living system. So yeah, 1990s and in 2000, globalization and eco-capitalism happened. So all of a sudden, you started to see like a lot of green building become mainstream. But I think now when we look back, it's like a lot of time is greenwashing is very shallow. And we also speak about like high-tech sustainability, like for example, leads, solar panels, and eco labels, just like what we mentioned previously in the first chapter. A lot of times it's like you can get the certification before you even seen the performance. So a lot of critical voice was asking, is it efficient? Is it efficient enough? Like how could so which also push the regenerative like development emerge. Like for example, Regenesis group, they started training and piloting methods. Bill Reeds was actually the founding father of like LEED certification system. So he himself also looked into otherwise. Architecture also slowly to reconnect with the place-based development and the bioregional planning. So climate breakdown and inequality happened like in the tens and until now. A lot of fire, floods, and extinction happen. So, so the climatic collapse is now visible. You actually seeing it like across the past 3 years. There was a lot of wildfire happening, and Valencia, like places like Valencia, has flood. Um, and and so all of a sudden there's a lot of places that you wouldn't imagine climatic like disaster would happen. They now experience it like so frequent to the point that you think that is a norm. And COVID-19 also revealed a deep fragility of the system. So like, a virus happened and then we put ourselves like in the house for 3 years. And social movement rise, like there's a lot of indigenous right. So I think during the pandemic, there was also a lot of discussion about like, yeah, so certain community is actually like how could we be more fair to certain communities. So climatic justice, like also the discussion of it also happened a lot. And degrow, instead of like looking at a constant growth, how could we look into like reducing growth in order to not reaching like the earth capacity. Yeah. Regenerative design also mature as a response as well. Living buildings, ecological village, and transition town. So how could design work as a facilitation, not imposition? And healing center participatory processes emerge. Healing. So so how could your process being like enable other people to participate? There's a lot of attention over the indigenous resurgence as well, and also the multi-species ethics. So a lot of time, like we speak about the human-centric design, actually when you dive down into the concept of it, it's very selfish. It's very human-centered. So human-centered means that you don't care about other species. You assume everything else is for free, but it was exactly the problem of like industrialization. During the industrialization, we exploit the nature because we assume oil is for free, gas is for free. Of course, it's like you still need to buy it, but it's like only in the human world. Do you buy it from the nature? Do you compensate it to a nature? No, nature doesn't really have an agency. So a lot of human culture just assume nature is for free. Yeah. Mm. So yeah, I think for the next session, I also want to go through like some case study over the global regenerative practice. Now you already have an overview of like how the regenerative practice actually like kind of organically evolve, but at the same time, I also want to emphasize on that, like at the moment, sadly, a lot of these development they also kind of like done in a way or evolve in a way that like it was still our response to like the crisis of the time or the awareness of the time. And yeah, and sometimes I just wish that like we can be more long-term thinking. And but I think it's also important to give like places, like especially like this class, for some of the global regenerative practices, so hopefully that will inspire. So earlier on in the previous chapter, we speak about before building there's a purpose and context, and during construction there's a process and material, during use, performance and reciprocity, and at the end use, we have disassembly and legacy. So previously, we also speak about like, okay, does the building play a role in this ecological and social system in the center, and the structure, does it really need it? Like So I think previously we questioned like, yeah, how do we ascertain the building present like to the environment? How does it respond to the local climate and also the community knowledge? And what kind of cycle are we talking about? Like, is the building embedded in? And during construction, how do we look into the material? Are they renewable? Are they can be reused or local? For the construction methods, like are they empowering the local labor or knowledge system? And how much of the energy and waste is generated during the building? And how can that be minimized or reintegrate? And does it give more than it takes? And how does it support the health and culture and well-being of its user and surrounding? Can it adapt to the changing need without needing to be demolished? And can the building be constructed and reused or biodegradable? And what is left behind in terms of the material, relationship, and knowledge? Does it regenerate the site ecologically, socially, and culturally after its end use? Does it help to train future stewards and land listener in its design, use, or transformation? So I want to bring you attention to this project, Mati Handmade School, Bangladesh. It was designed by Hannah Aringer. Anna Heringer was someone I really looked up to. Yeah. And I still remember during my student days, like I was also looking at the one of my first encounter of this project was her work was being included in the Archiplex. I think it was like several years before my graduate design, and like it was the project was beautifully coordinated and constructed together with the local user. I think her herself like basically spent 7 years in her final project, and she was building it together with the students and villager and also the local stakeholder were participating in the building and maintenance processes. So this is the building being used, like being made, like together with the designer and the local people. And there's a lot of local material being used, and also because it was maintained and it was built by the local people, so in the later maintenance, it's also helped the local people to understood how to repair. So during the I still remember in my Bartlett days, like after our final design, like we also invited Anna Heringer to be in the in the speaker list. So she also mentioned about like how, in fact, during that time, it was there was an economical crisis because of the Lehman Brothers, the Big Short incidents, like our banking in our the banking war, and which also trickled down to the construction field as well. So a lot of people couldn't even find a job, like despite there was a lot of like graduate from the architectural departments. So, but you mentioned, in fact, there's so much job out there, but it's just like it's just a matter of how we define job at the moment. There are so many issues like needed to be resolved out there, but architect like should be looking at like a lot of problem in the world rather than like only servicing certain sector. So yeah, this is another picture of this beautiful building. And then the other case study I want to bring to your attention is Hassan Fatih. Yeah. So Hassan Fatih worked in Egyptian in sorry, I think there is a mistype. It's actually Hassan Fatih in New Gorna. So basically it's the application and innovation of the local material and in the old Corner community to new housing development. So instead of like during that time, these architect was facing a situation that like was facing a time that like a lot of people were building things from the imported material, like for example concrete, because it was popular. Modernism was popular during the time. It's also challenged like the Egyptian mindset as well, like you know, to consider what is new, what is being considered as in time. So, but rather than like subscribing to those material that is like tend to be expensive, tend to be very time consuming because you need to retrain the entire workforce as well. Uh, tend to be not necessarily like resilient enough, like because local people wouldn't be able to know how to maintain that. So Hassan Fatih was building like with the local material, despite it was the time that like modernism was widespread in different region, and because of that, like he was also managed to enable the local people to build that building and maintain that building with their local material. And the other project I want to speak about is ZCB Bamboo Pavilion. So it was built by the Chinese University of Hong Kong School of Architecture. So it's big about like if you've seen I don't know how many of you been to Hong Kong, but you must have seen like some Hong Kong movie having a lot of bamboo scaffolding like outside the building when they want to repair, when they want to renovate like certain tower or building. So, so that scaffolding system has been something very popular in Hong Kong for many years, and because of that, it's also trained like a lot of craftsmen who understood how to put together those scaffolding technique like very quickly. Something like this, bamboo scaffolding technique in Hong Kong. So the school, Hong Kong U, um, they were looking at like, okay, so how could we use that skill set, that technique to be put together this into this like pavilion building, using 475 like bamboo, and then it can be like made into a pavilion. So it's quite fascinating to see like you know how the old technique and old like the craft being used into something quite contemporary. So which also showcase like the processes. Mhm. And the other case study, I think this one is very important, like Oroville Earth Institute, because it's managed to train quite a lot of people around the world and looking into earth building as the local material research and educational institution. So a review is now no longer just a design practice, but also a educational institution. So it started in 1989 and by the Housing and Urban Development Corporation. And it's already won like 15 awards, 4 international and 11 national. And a review actually has worked in 40 countries around the globe. So a review actually provided all these courses, but at the same time, it was building like, you know, through all this program, it was also participated in a lot of building. So it's educated more than like 14,429 people across like 94 countries in sustainable building technology and land management. Mm. So it's focusing on the use of earth as the building material. And a lot of knowledge was actually disseminated like through training courses, seminar, workshop, and manual, and other publication. And Euroview is also a research and development center for earthen technology. So it's also provide a lot of like publication and education and dissemination like for along this process. And so if people interested in learning how to build with earth, like they can come to Euroview. So they're not simply looking at the local people, but also the global global people. visitor. So these are some of the overview project, like the build project from the institute. So overview actually garner like around 15 awards for his work. Like I think the key one is Aga Khan Award. So if you have a chance, like check out Aga Khan Award. If I'm not remember wrong, Anna Heringer also received Aga Khan Award previously, and the World Habitat Awards as well, and Aga Khan Award, the real awards like for the visitor center. And this one is a project that like in fact it has a longer video. I wish to introduce you more because it's a project that looking at regenerate knowledge, land, and community capacity, um, anchored in the seasonal rhythm and traditional material cycle. So I really hope that like you, but I think the video I can incorporate here is very short. So there's a longer video that you can check out over here from this link. And this project also empower the worker of the region with knowledge, and it's quite touching, like it's quite moving. So this is the end product of the project.
Rather than having grassroots teams going into the village and being limited in how many people they can deal with, let the villages come here. Not only the villages, but people working in development, academics, policymakers, fellow NGOs. This is, as a brief and as a building, this has grown organically. And at the beginning, the requirement was simply to build a hall. Today it's become a campus. There are lots of buildings. There are some in the eucalyptus grove. If you have chance, you can go there. There are some more buildings planned over there. It is built as a building from earth. And Sukhdeep can tell you how it is. The foundation of this large building, all the pillars that you see, each pillar is about 1 ton in weight. And this entire roof that you see is about 180 tons. Everything standing on earth foundation. And the foundation is only 3 feet deep, waist height. Only earth, mixed with a pinch of cement. And when we tested those foundations, we were told by the senior civil engineers in Chennai that this can take a 7-story building on it. So it is that strong. So here is a chance for us to actually show traditional wisdom in a modern context. So although this building is out of earth, it is highly engineered. The bricks are precise to half a millimeter, as opposed to a normal brick available in the market which has a huge tolerance. And again built with local, unskilled villagers. So they were trained into building. That's very important. This week, Sukhdeep and I decided we would do this as a building contract. What we normally do is we train the workers on a daily basis and we pay them a wage at the end of the week. As an incentive, let's do a contract. Let's see how they respond. So I went to the Royal Institute of British Architects. I wrote a consult contract. Damages, deadlines, rates, all kinds of things, courts, proper legal documents. And we worked it out on the basis that this is this is a 180-ton roof. And it's got to be handled by people who've never done it before. So we learn on the job. About 4.5 months, 5 months to this age, we go on contract. 8 weeks. We started with this high idealism that we will train villagers, and none of us had done it before. So on day 1, which was a few years before this, we found ourselves on the starting day surrounded by 40 local alcoholic men. This area is supposed to be one of the most alcoholic areas in the entire Tamil Nadu state, the Villupuram district, and neither of us knew the language. And just these 40 alcoholic men were standing beside us. And that's when we both understood what is the gravity of the task before us. And
And I had written a little speech in English, which a colleague in the office had translated for me in Tamil, and I had simply learned it by heart. So I gave that whole 20-minute speech in Tamil. And in the speech, I told them about a little story which my dad had told me when I was a little girl. The story is that there is a construction site, and a gentleman is passing by, and he wants to know what is happening. So he approaches the first man and says, "Sir, what is it that you're doing?" So the first person says, "I'm chipping stone." The second person says, "I'm earning my daily wage." And the third person says, "I'm building a temple to my Lord." So I told all of them that here also we are going to build a temple to our Lord. But I have learned one word in Tamil, which is the word for Lord, Kadavul, which is made up of two Tamil words, Kadanda Ul, which means having crossed over within. So I said, we are going to build a temple to our Lord, but not the Lord which we shall install in the form of a deity, but that Kadanda Ul, he who resides within all of us, the inner perfection, we have to manifest that. So that was the story how we began. And about 2 years later, one day I happened to come to site earlier than usual, at about 7:30 in the morning. And I saw that on that day, all the people, the construction crew, was turning up 45 minutes before time. So I asked one of the ladies that, how come you're not here at 8:45? Site starts at 8:30. So she said, well, today is our meditation day. These are villagers who are considered alcoholic, wife beaters, illiterate. They have started a meditation. So I was waiting to know what is happening. 8 o'clock, everybody was there. They had put some flowers in the center and they started a silent meditation. They did that about 15 minutes, and after that I was waiting to see what's going on. So one of them picked up a book in which the author has explained the difference between need and greed. So he picked up this book and he said, Asay and service. And I was actually thinking to myself that this is an impossible topic to explain to anybody. And he read out the whole thing, which Mother has written, and after that, he sealed the whole explanation in just one line. He said, need is sambar and rice, greed is chicken and mutton. So when I asked them later on, I said, how come you all had this idea of starting a meditation? So he said, well, you were the one who told us that we are building a temple to our Lord. So it actually came full circle back.
We build skyscrapers in the West, 80 stories in 14 months. And the client will just say, this is a case, and it's in the scope in the contract. If it's not ready, see in court. That is the working environment of contract. And is that really a way to work? If you really want to get the best out of somebody, you frighten the life out of them before the project starts. And what happened here is we thereby asked us to do this project based on trust and trust. We didn't ask to see previous projects. We didn't want to know if projects had been completed on time. We didn't want to know how much the building sold for, anything like that. Just think. Trust. So we have given that to our workers. What else could we do? And if you think about what an actual village laborer, the word I don't like, but a laborer, how does it work? 1 week they dig a hole in some field. The next week they dig a hole in another field. 2 years later, they come back and fill up that hole. Then they dig more holes. It's kind of mindless work. If you imagine doing mindless work, what do you get out? Here, they work for 1 week. They come back the second, third. Some of our workers have been here 4 years in this field. Some of them, I don't know if the young man is around, but he began, all he knew how to do was dig a hole. We told him, you dig a hole precisely. You don't tape measures exactly as on the computer drawing. He did not even know when to stop digging. What's the level of skill he has? Today, he's a multi-skilled guy who's involved in all aspects of construction. The thing is, he's got an identity with the work. when the masons didn't finish, they were bringing their families to show them what they had done. I've seen construction workers with their fancy mobile phones videoing what they had finished at the end of the day. Now, believe me, in New York, in London, in Berlin, in places I've worked, no one does that. 5 o'clock, they are out of the door. Out of the door. So we are very blessed to have a crew like that. I have never come across a construction crew like this in my life. And they've got serious skill, they've got confidence. If you know, normally, the beginning, if we have visitors, they would all shy away and run away. They're very shy. Today, if they were here, they would be standing with us in front of us.
So I think this is what I really wish you guys can reflect on, like, you know, the building project, like, is like, how could it empower, how could it bring back like confidence and knowledge back to the people. So yeah, like finally, I actually want you to think about, like, what else do you think is important to be considered in the regenerative architectural movement? Yeah. So here's the end of our class today, and I hope you enjoy the session and also see you in the next session.